Hello everyone, I'm here with Amit Mohindra. Amit, very glad to have you.
My pleasure. So happy to be here.
We're here at Unleash and you just gave a workshop on people analytics nirvana. Can you, what was the workshop about?
Yeah, so, you know, until a few years ago, you wouldn't use people and analytics together in a sentence, let alone nirvana. So, the conference has so many sessions on analytics and some of the technical aspects. I thought it might be refreshing to take a bit of a different tack and think about analytics from a more reflective standpoint. And I feel I could do it because I've been doing people analytics for quite a while. And I decided to talk about this very esoteric notion of nirvana as a destination and try and help people at the event sort of sit back and reflect because we often don't have time to reflect. Right? We're so busy, even at the conference, going from session to session. At work, we're busy from project to project. And it's only when you reflect and you think about what's happened that you can learn and improve. And not just what's happened in the past, but what's going to happen. And that's called reflecting on the future. And that's what this conference is about, the future of work. And what's the role of analytics, what's the role of technology. And so I sort of had a bit of fun with it. It was a bit of a risk. I wasn't sure if people would really come to this.
But I think it played out well because I heard that the room was packed. Because you've been, for the viewers that don't know, you've been doing people analytics for quite a while already. Can you explain something about your background?
Yeah. So, originally I'm an electrical engineer. And I went to graduate school to study labor economics because I always felt growing up in India that the solution to many of our problems was not necessarily more capital, but what do you do with so many people? Very, real sort of situation. And so I became a labor economist. I didn't really anticipate ending up in HR. I didn't really know what HR was. So I became a research economist, with studying labor markets. And somehow then I got into the private sector and into consulting, and I did compensation benefits for a long time. And then my first really formal people analytics job was as the head of workforce intelligence at McKesson, a big healthcare company, and then Apple. But I started out the first time in 1999. I created a group called HR Strategy and Analysis at Lehman Brothers. So 19 years ago. And at that point, it was just me. And I convinced my boss, let's start this group because there was so much work to do. And single-handedly, I did predicting attrition, predicting success. We looked at qualitative and quantitative information. We did some rudimentary text analytics. What companies did for the next 10, 15 years was already sort of done. And if you think about it, now there's the artificial intelligence, machine learning, but a lot of the mathematics haven't changed. Survival analysis, it's the same from 20, 30 years ago. Logistic regression, even some of the machine learning techniques, they were just called non-parametric econometrics, but now it's artificial intelligence.
So you've worked at Apple, but recently you've made a change. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate to work at Apple for a few years. I was hired to set up the people analytics team, which I did and built it from just a handful of people to a bigger team. And it was time for me to move on. I decided that I'd like to go back and work for myself again. And I've launched a company called People Analytics Success. And it's got 3 pillars so far. One is advisory, so helping companies get started in analytics or do specific projects. It's helping HR tech startups that are applying machine learning, for example, to people's situations and how do you hone the product. The second pillar is exec coaching. So how do you help HR leaders who aren't comfortable with analytics get more comfortable, because now it's pervasive and you really have to be comfortable. Also helping people analytics leaders show up as HR leaders,
Yeah.
so they can have a seat at the HR table. Otherwise, they're just tools, and they can be ignored.
Yeah.
But if you're there making decisions, it's helpful. I've also found it helpful for the analytics leader to also have some sort of other responsibility, whether it's compensation or mobility or operations, to have some sort of stake in the function of HR. And then finally, education. So that's one big need, and I know you understand that as well, because you're in that business too.
We've been dabbling in it.
Yeah, no, it's very impressive, and it's so important to help HR business partners and others again just get more confident, get more comfortable. Hopefully, some of them will get so interested that they want to learn the mathematics and the econometrics. But you don't have to do that for everyone.
True.
It's really, ultimately what's really important is how can you make the best use of the existing people analytics team as a business HR person, and again show up as a more strategic and business-oriented HR person.
Yeah, and the education, of course, is very important to, in the end, shift the culture and to actually implement the change. And I think that also goes back to why the analytics leader needs to be involved with the top HR team. They need to make that impact, and their voice needs to be heard in order to be truly effective.
The talk I gave on the people analytics nirvana, I was talking about the newness of analytics and what happens in the future. Maybe it's not even a thing. Maybe it's just pervasive, and you don't need an analytics team. And there's a way of thinking about it using I think it's a Buddhist approach. So think about it. There is no mountain. There is a mountain. There is. Right? So just think about that. There is no people analytics. There is people analytics. There is. And it's just pervasive. It's a part of how we do business. And that's the importance of the education piece, so that everyone is equipped. And it may take a while.
Probably, yeah. So do you see then analytics, you see analytics as an integral part of doing business? Does people analytics still exist as a separate unit, or will it just be analytics and will people analytics in the end disappear?
Yeah, so that's a topic of debate, and I think there's a risk. I consider it a risk that the people analytics is consumed or subsumed within a broader analytics team. There are some advantages for that. I think you'll probably get more resources, and you'll have different ideas, right? And so I think you could get some creativity and innovation through that. But I think people analytics is different because you're dealing with people. You need to have some sort of understanding of how HR works. You have to have a stake in people and their success. And I think people who get into HR have that. Right? And if it's just about the numbers, then you're not doing doing justice to the function.
So the passion for people, even if it's through data, is still important too.
Because I think you can just use numbers and make decisions that are not right. That don't make sense. So you still need the human interpretation. So the advocacy of somebody who's within the HR function for people to have that interpretation.
Any closing thoughts before we wrap this up, Amit?
Yeah, this is an amazing event, and there's so much going on. Very frenetic. There's a lot of talk about the future and about AI, and I see people getting caught up in that. And so, what I would recommend is just, again, reflect, sit back, think about things. Don't necessarily jump to action quickly. But at the end of the day, action is what's required from people analytics. And we've come a long way from having no data to some useful data. We've come a long way in going from having data to insights. But the missing step, the last mile, if you will, is from insights to action. And that's where, again, I think if the people analytics leader has a stake in a function or is part of that leadership team, you can have more influence in actually making it happen.
Perfect. Well, Amit,
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric.